Hey there, and welcome back to Eldest Daughter Saves the World, the podcast where you just have an eldest daughter talking about life. I'm your host, Coach Laura, and I am actually here by myself solo for this episode. I just had the thought to have this episode and didn't have time to get someone scheduled. So hopefully, listening to me kind of talk about parenting will be of help to some folks. What I wanted to talk about today is parenting authentically for yourself. I think a lot of times we have these pressures to perform, to have our kids do a certain thing or be a certain way. And we as parents, take on a lot as far as that goes. So I did want to talk, I have a few points I want to talk about with that. So hopefully this will resonate with you in some kind of way. And just if you take nothing else today, you're doing a good job. Doing exactly what you're doing as a parent, you're doing a good job because your kid is healthy, your kid is happy. That's all that matters at the end of the day. So, the first thing I wanted to share, if you're not familiar with me and my family, I live with my husband Alex and our two boys, Rowan and Milo. Milo is 11 and Rowan is 15. So, we are right in that preteen, teenager stage. My oldest just took driver's ed. Like, we're kind of in the thick of that. And it's been an interesting journey. I am the girliest girl that you can imagine, and somehow got stuck with two boys that are your typical boys. They like messy things, they like video games, they, you know, burp and fart and do all of those things that I just am not really keen to. But you know what? I've gotten used to it because I have these two boys that I'm raising, and I will say, in my husband Alex, I have an amazing partner. So I am probably a little bit skewed and a little bit spoiled. That's my bias when it comes to parenting. That I have a great partner that I'm doing this crazy journey with. And if you are doing it solo or have a partner that's not as involved, I give you all the kudos in the world because I have a lot of friends and family members that are doing it all by themselves. And I just adore the strength that you all have. So I just want to put that disclaimer out before we get too much further into talking. So, one thing I wanted to talk about is first this idea of performance parenting, where social media or it could be family members or whatever, you have this I won't say it's a compulsion, but it's a pressure to parent a certain way, to have the most perfect family, right? We're taking the pristine family holiday pictures in front of our Christmas tree or in front of that big vacation landmark that we took and some of those kinds of things. And I think a lot of times what we don't talk about, and I know our generation, and I say our, I mean elder millennials, Gen Xers, especially as we're getting to be older parents and maybe even grandparents, we're starting to really, say, hey, wait a minute, let's talk about this messiness that happens. And I think a lot of times social media is some cause for that, right? I want to share when my kid got all A's, and I want to, brag about this sports thing that they do. And oh my gosh, we spend every weekend at the ball diamond, and that's like a badge of honor sometimes. And I'm here to tell you that if your parenting looks different than that, it's okay. And I am saying that as a parent whose parenting looks different than that. People always ask me, oh, your boys are probably so busy. Actually, my boys, my oldest participates in band, and that's really our only activity that we have for our family. And that's not because my husband and I said no activities. That's just because my kids genuinely are not interested in that. And so, what do we do instead? We travel as a family. I don't put this pressure on us to have family dinner every night together at the table, but we do sit down at the table together, usually at least once or twice a week. And I remember when I had babies, and I think that's when the pressure really starts, that all these moms around me were making their own baby food and their, cloth diapering and all of these things. And yeah, I don't love that I filled up the landfill with two babies worth of diapers, but you know what? Gerber made green beans and water in their baby food, and that was really good for my kid. And so I think sometimes figuring out what works for you and it's okay. And it's also okay to parent differently than your parents parented you. And I think for a lot of us, there was a shift between the 80s and 90s into this more gentle parenting. I also, had a little bit of the helicopter parenting that I think a lot of us millennials, especially, are like, I'm not going to hover over my kid every second. And maybe you go too far the other way. That's okay. But I think a lot of times, not only does it put pressure on us as parents to kind of perform and have the perfect kids, but it also puts that pressure on our kids of like, I used to joke that my kids, whenever a camera would come out, they'd instantly smile, right? They knew what a phone meant. They knew that we were taking tons of pictures of them. And, yeah, that's, kind of funny thing, but it's a lighthearted way to show that a lot of times, it does affect our kids that we're trying to put things online. And I have personally made the choice here lately as my kids are getting older, and I probably should have been doing it all along, but I asked them, okay, I'm taking a picture of you. Is it okay if I share because aunts and uncles and friends want to see these pictures? Is that okay with you? And both of my kids are pretty easygoing, and I haven't had a point where they're like, no, I'm so embarrassed. I don't want you to do that. But like, I think there's a mutual respect that has to go along with parenting. And I say that with a grain of salt because, yes, my kids know that my word is what we're doing, right, at the end of the day. But I do try to be a partner with them because we've all been, whether it's parenting or not, we've all been a part of something where it's just unbearable because you have no say in it and it's just not going how you would live your life and, some of those kinds of things. So within reason, we try to do that. If my kids tell me they're tired and they need to sleep in, then by God, I'm going to let them sleep in. I am not one of those parents over the summer that says, I need you up by 7 a.m. and you're not going to sleep in. Like, I trust them to trust their bodies, which I think, and I know we're probably going to do a whole podcast episode on millennial body image and a lot of diet culture and a lot of things that we grew up with that, we were just taught to not trust our bodies. You're not hungry. You just need to drink water, right? And I would never, ever, ever do that to my kids, even though they're boys. And I know, as much as I don't want to bring gender into things, it is very different parenting boys versus girls, just in the way that society treats them, just in the way that, they're perceived, how they have to act, how they have to present, just all of those kinds of things. So I also want to put a disclaimer in here. I am not the perfect parent. I'm just kind of riffing on what I have found to be successful. And I think I have two pretty great and adjusted kids. And so, okay, it is what it is. And this, I'm also, very biased and blessed in the fact that I don't have a lot of addiction and things like that in my family. If you do, I know you're dealing with a whole other thing, right? And so, so this is why we're talking about parenting authentically because you have to parent what works for your situation, your personality, and kind of making sure that you're aligned and it feels good for you at the end of the day. And so I think along with that, talking to your kids, one of the things that we've really enforced in our family is the idea that like our kids can ask us anything. And I'm going to give them, right? I give them the age appropriate thing, right? But now that my kid is 15, he's pretty darn close to being an adult. So we're going to be pretty honest about a lot of things that are happening. And that could be things in the world, that could be things like sex, relationships, things like that. And I also apologize to my kids. I snap sometimes. I fly off the handle or maybe I freak out about something that I shouldn't. And I'm sure to come back to them and say, you know what, I was kind of a jerk this morning and I'm sorry about that. And I think with that too, like not every moment of parenting is something that you should just be loving, right? And I think a lot of times I joke all the time with my kids. I'm like, I would literally take a bullet for you kids, but I don't like you and want to be around you right now. Right. And I think a lot of times we hear these like popular phrases and it's like, oh, I just, I'll use a great example and I'll call myself out on this. When you have a baby and, people are like, it's this magical moment and I locked eyes with that little human being and my whole world clicked into place. And, these things that people say. Was having my babies magical? Yes. Do I regret one single moment of it? Absolutely not. Did I immediately feel like my whole world clicked into place? No, because they give me this human that I'm now in charge of. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just went through one of the most brutal medical experiences of my life having this baby. My husband's emotionally spent from supporting me. It's just not always the sunshine and rainbows. I think that a lot of times that things have to be correct rather than honest. And so I think when you're parenting, leading with that honesty is okay. Of, you know what, I would really rather be on vacation sipping a drink on the beach right now than sitting at the basketball game. That's okay, right? And I think a lot of times we have to be honest with ourselves, and that allows us to give ourselves some grace that struggles do exist. We're not the only people going through these things. And I think a lot of times finding that group of people that are also parenting authentically, because I'm gonna lie, not gonna lie to you, I live in a town where it's a lot of performative stuff, right? Like my daughter does cheer and my son plays football and and that's great, honestly. If that's authentic to you, that's great. If it's not authentic to you, it's okay if it's not authentic to you. And so I think that a lot of times we struggle with that. I struggle with that. Like, why, what is broken in me that I don't want to be head of the PTO, right? Like nothing, and this is just my personality, again, just my personality, but it makes me want to vomit to think about doing those things. I'm the person that's like, how much can I write you a check for, instead of me having to be there and, schmooze with people I don't want to schmooze with. And so, yeah, just saying what you mean, I think a lot of times, and having that emotional honesty, even with yourself, can be really, really huge. So let's talk about, in kind of relation to that, trusting your instincts over something that's trendy, right? And I think a lot of us have, and I noticed this in myself, like certain things that my parents did just innately came out in me when I was a parent, right? Like my whole family loves babies. And so that definitely rubbed off on me. And it's fun to mess with little kids and it's fun to, wave at them across the restaurant and those kinds of things. Like that was instinctual for me. I didn't even have to think about that. But there were other things in parenting that, I had to really kind of rail against what I should, quote unquote, be doing versus what my instinct was in parenting. And I think that can go from everything, telling I remember one time, my maybe not so nicer things, my mom had wanted to do something with my son and it just didn't sit right with me. And it was like taking him to see I think it was taking him to the airport to visit my sister. Well, I knew he was going to be grumpy. It was a 2-hour drive. He was going to be in the car. I just didn't see that it was worthwhile for him to have to be at the airport to see her. And so in my not so niceness, I snapped, he's not a show pony. Right. And yeah, that probably wasn't the best way to handle it. And I did end up apologizing to her. But at the same time, that was authentic to me that my kid deserved rest and he deserved to not be on display for everyone. And so that was my instinct in that situation. And, I understand that's a very low stakes situation. And guess what? He still got to see his aunt, spoiler alert. But I think a lot of times we overthink these things. We, replay these conversations in our head. And just knowing that if you've trusted that instinct over the parenting advice, the parenting books, right? Like, you should, another great example for my kids. I am which is partially why we had that whole episode on ADHD and all those kinds of things. I'm a very high achieving person, and it has stressed me out for 40 years. And so I told my husband before we had kids, I was not going to parent my kids to just have to reach the highest pinnacle of everything they did. And I won't say that my parents actually did that. Like that is also something innately in me. But I think also that was society at the time. I know a lot of, especially females, that were, just kind of pushed to that level of excellence. And so I personally have not seen any value to myself, right? Like being class salutatorian has not gotten me any further in life than it would have been if I had just graduated with my honors diploma. And even then, I don't know that that's any different than any other kind of diploma. But realizing that with my kids, I wasn't going to stress them out about their grades. Both of my kids are insanely smart. And so, yes, they are going to apply themselves. But if they occasionally get a C, I'm okay with it, right? But I'm more concerned with you being the kind kid. I'm more concerned with you being happy than I am with you, just having straight A's and being in every club. And so I think that that is something that I've really I won't say struggled with because it was a decision that I made. And so it was something that I have had to stick to my guns on a couple of times. And, we had a time during the pandemic when my oldest just wasn't turning in his work. And I understand the pandemic was going on, but literally all that kid had to do was hit submit and he wasn't doing it. And so we had to, work and work and work with him. And he finally realized, like, if I just turn my assignments in, life is so much easier. And so that was kind of a learning lesson for him and for us. That yeah, we did need to push a little bit at that point, but just we had to be authentic with that, and that was our instinct of, I don't need you to be a straight A student, but I do need you to turn your work in, and kind of finding that middle ground there. That's where my instinct leads me. Now maybe your instinct is school is everything, and if they don't do this they won't be successful in life, right? Because I make it sound like I'm this lackadaisical parent. No, I am not my kid's best friend. They have boundaries, they have chores, they have rules, they have all of those things, but I do it in a way that's genuine to me. And I think a lot of times we underestimate how perceptive our children are. So if you are parenting inauthentically, a lot of times they're going to notice your forced enthusiasm, your fake emotions, that what you're doing and what you're saying is not lining up. And I think that can lead to a lot of issues with the parent-child relationship of, like, mom says one thing and does another, or, she's always happy. So, I'm feeling sad. Apparently, I'm not supposed to feel sad. And so just trying to go through that, that whole range of emotions and being genuine about who we are as people in front of our kids. Now, I'm not saying that they need to know every little nook and cranny of, being an adult and learning that the world stinks sometimes. And, but those little glimpses into, great example. When my mom passed away, my kids saw me cry. They saw me break down. They saw me have those emotions. They would sometimes come out of nowhere, and then I would, talk to them. Like, I just really suddenly missed Nana, and I needed to get that emotion out of my body. And part of it, my kids have the blessing curse of having a mom that's a yoga teacher. So we do a lot of feelings, we do a lot of deep breathing, we do a lot of those kinds of things because that's authentic to me. That's what I do for a business. So that is part of my parenting of, you can be mad. I used to tell my kids when they were just inconsolable, I understand that you're upset. You can scream and cry all you want, but I want you to go into your room and do that because the rest of us deserve to have a dinner that's not interrupted by this. And so a lot of times that would kind of de-escalate the situation a little bit more. And, yeah, feel your feelings, do that. But I also have the right for you not to, ruin everybody else's fun. So that's my genuine parenting as far as that goes. And I think what we really have to do with all of this, if you take nothing else today, give yourself permission to be imperfect, right? None of us are perfect people. None of us are perfect parents as much as we want to be, but you have to know your limitations. I am a much better mom of older kids and teenagers, I think, than I ever was. I loved my babies. I loved my toddlers. Don't get me wrong. I loved all of those stages. I am also a person that gets very overstimulated very quickly. So the noisy toys, the being touched all the time, the always wanting to be picked up and held, I did all of those things, but it was not authentic to me as a person because I had to figure out what my limitations were. And so my husband and I kind of figured that out. He would jump in when I was overstimulated and I would let him have a break when he was. And, trying to figure that out. And I think, I really appreciate some of the questions that my kids ask me sometimes. And we have a thing in our family that I'll say, this needs to stay in Team Mickler because it may be something that's not appropriate to talk about. They'll want to know why a family member reacted a certain way, or, why they go to such and such's house and this happens there, or, things like that. And I will say my children are pretty darn sheltered as far as life goes. But, I also feel that they've chosen good friends because of how I've equipped them and my husband's equipped them to be in the world. And so I think that what we've created in our family is a place where you can be vulnerable, you can ask those questions, and I'm not gonna, oh, how dare you ask me about sex? You're only 11 years old. Like, he's heard something, and I'd rather him have the correct information than learning about sex from other 11-year-olds, right? And so I have made that space that, as uncomfortable as it is for me to talk about that, we're going to talk about that, right? Or what does a word mean? Or I heard somebody called this name. Why is that bad? And so just kind of figuring out, like, living in the world as a person that, can kind of respect everybody, but still get their questions answered so that later they don't, make a big snafu, or they're equipped to correct people when they're not real. So that is what I wanted to talk about today with authentic parenting authentically. And you may disagree with everything I say. That is your prerogative as an authentic parent. I'm just kind of sharing how I've tackled it. I think just giving you permission to be yourself when you're parenting. If you're a yeller, yell at your kids, right? I'm not a yeller. So when I yell at my kids, they know I mean business. But maybe you grew up in a loud family and everybody yells, and that's just, my grandpa was a yeller. He would yell when he was happy, he was yell when he was mad. And you just have to figure out what's for you and what's not for you. All right, so thank you so much for joining me this evening. Today, it's morning where I am as I'm recording this, but whenever you're listening to this, I hope that you can take a little bit from it. Know that you're doing a good job as a parent. And I haven't mentioned, but know that you're doing a good job if you're not a parent. If you recognize that you are not somebody that wants to be a parent, it's okay too, right? Some of the best aunties and uncles in the world come from those folks that don't want to be parents. So I love you all. I can't wait to talk to you next time. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you soon.